All right, chapter 37, The Mysterious Dagger. During this time, we had left the bright and transparent forest behind us. We were mute with astonishment, overcome by a kind of feeling which was next door to apathy. We kept running in spite of ourselves. It was a perfect right, which assembled one of those horrible sensations we sometimes meet it with in our dreams. Instinctively, we made our way towards the Central Sea, and I cannot tell what wild thoughts passed through my mind, nor of what follies I might have been guilty, but for a very serious preoccupation which brought me back to practical life. Though I was aware that we were treading on a soil quite new to us, I, however, every now and then noticed certain aggregations of rock, the shape of which forcibly reminded me of those near Port Gretchen. This confirmed, moreover, the indications of the compass and our extraordinary and unlooked for, as well as involuntary, return to the north of this great central sea. It was so like our starting point that I could scarcely doubt the reality of our position. Streams and cascades fell in hundreds over the numerous projections of the rocks. I actually thought I could see our faithful and monotonous Hans and the wonderful grotto in which I had come back to life after my tremendous fall. Then, as we advanced still farther, the position of the cliffs, the appearance of the stream, the unexpected profile of a rock threw me again into a state of bewildering doubt. After some time, I explained my state of mental indecision to my uncle. He confessed to a similar feeling of hesitation. He was totally unable to make up his mind in the midst of this extraordinary but uniform panorama. Paranorma, I'm sorry. There can be no doubt, I insisted, that we have not landed exactly at the place whence we first took our departure, but the tempest has brought us above our starting point. I think, therefore, that if we follow the coast, we shall once more find Port Gretchen. In that case, cried my uncle, it is useless to continue our exploration. The very best thing we can do is to make our way back to the raft. Are you quite sure, Harry, that you are not mistaken? It is difficult, was my reply, to come to any decision, for all these rocks are exactly alike. There is no marked difference between them. At the same time, the impression on my mind is that I recognize the promontory at the foot of which our worthy Hans constructed the raft. We are, I am nearly convinced, near a little port. If this be not it, I added, carefully examining a creek which appeared singularly familiar to my mind. My dear Harry, if this were the case, we should find traces of our own footsteps, some signs of our passage, and I can really see nothing to indicate our having passed this way. But I see something, I cried in an impetuous tone of voice, as I rushed forward and eagerly picked up something which shone in the sand under my feet. What is it? Cried the astonished and bewildered professor. This, was my reply, and I handed to my startled relative a rusty dagger of singular shape. What made you bring with you such a useless weapon? He exclaimed. It was needlessly hampering yourself. I bring it. It is quite new to me. I never saw it before. Are you sure it is not out of your collection? Not that I know of, said the professor, puzzled. I have no recollection of the circumstances. It was never my property. This is very extraordinary, I said, musing over the novel and singular incident. Not at all. There is a very simple explanation, Harry. The Icelanders are known to keep up the use of these antiquated weapons, and this must have belonged to Hans, who has let it fall without knowing it. I shook my head. The dagger had never been in the possession of the pacific and taciturn Hans. I knew him and his habits too well. Then what can it be, unless it be a weapon of some antediluvian warrior? I continued. Of some living man, a contemporary of the mighty shepherd from whom we have just escaped. But no mystery upon mystery, this is no weapon of the stony epoch, not even of the bronze period. It is made of excellent steel. Ere I could finish my sentence, my uncle stopped me short from entering upon a whole train of theories, and spoke in his most cold and decided tone of voice. Calm yourself, my dear boy, and endeavor to use your reason. This weapon, upon which we have fallen so unexpectedly, is a true dague, one of these worn by gentlemen in their belts during the 16th century. Its use was to give the coup de grace, the final blow, to the foe who would not surrender. It is clearly of Spanish workmanship. It belongs neither to you, nor to me, nor the eider-down hunter, nor to any of the living beings who may still exist so marvelously in the interior of the earth. What can you mean, uncle? I said, now lost in a host of surmises. Look closely at it, he continued. These jagged edges were never made by the resistance of human blood and bone. The blade is covered with a regular coating of iron mold and rust, which is not a day old, not a year old, not a century old, but much, much more. The professor began to get quite excited, according to custom, and was allowing himself to get carried away by his fertile imagination. I could have said something. He stopped me. Harry, he cried, we are now on the verge of a great discovery. This blade of a dagger you have so marvelously discovered, after being abandoned upon the sand for more than 100, 200, even 300 years, has been indented by someone endeavoring to carve an inscription on these rocks. But this poniard never got here of itself, I exclaimed. It could not have twisted itself. Someone therefore must have proceeded upon us, upon the shores of this extraordinary sea. Yes, a man. But what man has been sufficiently desperate to do such a thing? A man who has somewhere written his name with this very dagger, a man has endeavored once more to indicate the right road to the interior of the earth. Let us look around, my boy. You know not the importance of your singular and happy discovery. Prodigiously interested, we walked along the wall of the rock, examining the smallest fissures, which might find finally expanded into much wished for gully or shaft. We at last reached a spot where the shore became extremely narrow. The sea almost bathed the foot of the rocks, which were here very lofty and steep. There was scarcely a path wider than 2 yards at any point. At last, under a huge overhanging rock, we discovered the entrance of a dark and gloomy tunnel. There, on a square tablet of granite, which had been smoothed by rubbing it with another stone, we could see 2 mysterious and much worn letters, the 2 initials of the bold and extraordinary traveler who had preceded us on our adventurous journey. A.S. A.S., cried my uncle. You see, I was right. Arne Saknussemm. Always Arne Saknussemm. Chapter 38. No outlet. Blasting the rock. Ever since the commencement of our marvelous journey, I had experienced many surprises, had suffered from many illusions. I thought that I was case-hardened against all surprises, and could neither see nor hear anything to amaze me again. I was like a many who, have been around the world, finds himself wholly blaze and proof against the marvelous. When, however, I saw these 2 letters, which had been engraven 300 years before, I stood fixed in an attitude of mute surprise. Not only was there the signature of the learned and enterprising alchemist written in the rock, but I held in my hand the very identical instrument with which he had laboriously engraved it. It was impossible, without showing an amount of incredulity scarcely becoming a sane man, to deny the existence of the traveler and the reality of that voyage which I believe all along to have been a myth, the mystification of some fertile brain. While these reflections were passing through my mind, my uncle, the professor, gave way to an access of feverish and poetical excitement. Wonderful and glorious genius, great Saknussemm, he cried, you have left no stone unturned, no resource omitted, to show to other immortals the way into the interior of our mighty globe, and your fellow creatures can find the trail left by your illustrious footsteps 300 years ago, at the bottom of these obscure subterranean abodes. You have been careful to secure for others the contemplation of these wonders and marvels of creation. Your name engraved at every important stage of your glorious journey leads the hopeful traveler direct to the great and mighty discovery to which You devoted such energy and courage. The audacious traveler who shall follow your footsteps to the last will doubtless find your initials engraved with your own hand upon the center of the earth. I will be that audacious traveler. I will sign my name upon that very same spot, upon the central granite stone of this wondrous work of the Creator. But in justice to your devotion, to your courage, and to your being the first to indicate the road, let this cape, seen by you upon the shores of the sea, discovered by you, be called of all time Cape Saknussemm. This is what I heard, and I began to be roused to the pitch of enthusiasm indicated by those words. A fierce excitement roused me. I forgot everything. The dangers of the voyage and the perils of the return journey were now as nothing. What another man had done in ages past, I felt can be done again. I was determined to do it myself, and now nothing that man had accomplished appeared to me impossible. Forward, forward, I cried, in a burst of genuine and hearty enthusiasm. I had already started in the direction of the somber and gloomy gallery when the professor stopped me. He, the man so rash and hasty, he, the man so easily roused to the highest pitch of enthusiasm, checked me and asked me to be patient and show more calm. Let us return to our good friend Hans, he said. We will then bring the raft down to this place. I must say that though I had once yielded to my uncle's request, it was not without dissatisfaction, and I had hastened along the rocks of that wonderful coast. Do you know, my dear uncle, I said as we walked along, that we have been singularly helped by a concurrence of circumstances right up to this very moment. So you begin to see it, do you, Harry? Said the professor with a smile. Doubtless, I responded. And strangely enough, even the tempest has been the means of putting us on the right road. Blessings on the tempest. It brought us safely back to the very spot from which fine weather would have driven us forever. Supposing we had succeeded in reaching the southern and distant shores of this extraordinary sea, what would have become of us? The name of Saknussemm would never have appeared to us, and at this moment we should have been cast away upon an inhospitable coast, probably without an outlet. Yes, Harry, my boy, there is certainly something providential in that wandering at the mercy of the wind and the waves towards the south. We have come back exactly north, and what is better still, we fall upon this great discovery of Cape Saknussemm. I mean to say that it is more than surprising. There is something in it which is far beyond my comprehension. The coincidence is unheard of. It's marvelous. What matter? It is not our duty to explain facts, but to make the best possible use of them. Doubtless, my boy, but if you will allow me, said the really delighted professor. Excuse me, sir, but I see exactly how it will be. We shall take the northern route. We shall pass under the northern regions of Europe, under Sweden, under Russia, under Siberia, and who knows where, instead of burying ourselves under the burning plains and deserts of Africa, or beneath the mighty waves of the ocean. And that is all at this stage of our journey that I care to know. Let us advance, and heaven will be our guide. Yes, Harry, you are quite right. All is for the best. Let us abandon this horizontal sea, which could never have led to anything satisfactory. We shall descend, and everlastingly descend. Do you know, my dear boy, that to reach the interior of the earth we have only 5,000 miles to travel? Bah! I cried, carried away by the burst of enthusiasm. The distance is scarcely worth speaking about. The thing is to make a start. My wild, mad, and incoherent speeches continued until we rejoined our patient and phlegmatic guide. All was, we found, prepared for an immediate departure. There was not a single parcel but what was in its proper place. We all took up our posts on the raft, and the sail being hoisted, Hans received his directions and guided the frail bark towards the Cape Saknussemm, as we had definitely named it. The wind was unfavorable to a craft that was unable to sail close to the wind. It was constructed to go before the blast. We were continually reduced to pushing ourselves forward by means of poles. On several occasions, the rocks ran far out into the deep water, and we were compelled to make a long round. At last, after 3 long and weary hours of navigation, that is to say, about 6 o'clock in the evening, we found a place at which we could land. I jumped on shore first. In my present state of excitement and enthusiasm, I was always first. My uncle and the Icelander followed. The voyage from the port to this point in the sea had by no means calmed me. It had rather produced the opposite effect. I even proposed to burn our vessel, that is, to destroy our raft, in order to completely cut off our retreat. But my uncle sternly opposed this wild project. I began to think him particularly lukewarm and unenthusiastic. "At any rate, my dear uncle," I said, "let us start without delay." "Yes, my boy, I am quite eager to do so as you can be. But in the first place, let us examine this mysterious gallery, in order to find if we shall need to prepare and mend our ladders." My uncle now began to see to the efficiency of our Ruhmkorff coil, which would doubtless soon be needed. The raft, securely fastened to a rock, was left alone. Moreover, the opening to the new gallery was not 20 paces distant from the spot. Our little troop, with myself at the head, advanced. The orifice, which was almost circular, presented a diameter of about 5 feet. The somber tunnel was cut into the living rock and coated on the inside by a different material which had once passed through in a state of fusion. The lower part was about level with the water, so that we were able to penetrate to the interior without difficulty. We followed an almost horizontal direction, when at the end of about a dozen paces, our further advance was checked by an interposition of an enormous block of granite rock. "Accursed stone!" I cried furiously, on perceiving that we were stopped by what seemed an insurmountable obstacle. In vain we looked to the right, in vain we looked to the left. In vain examined it above and below. There existed no passage, no sign of any other tunnel. I experienced the most bitter and painful disappointment. So enraged that I would not admit the reality of any obstacle. I stooped to my knees. I looked under the mass of stone. No hole, no interstice. I then looked above, the same barrier of granite. Hans, with the lamp, examined the sides of the tunnel in every direction. But all in vain. It was necessary to renounce all hope of passing through. I had seated myself upon the ground. My uncle walked angrily and hopelessly up and down. He was evidently desperate. "But," I cried after some moments' thought, "what about Arne Saknussemm?" "You are right," replied my uncle. "He can never have been checked by a lump of rock." "No, 10,000 times no!" I cried, with extreme vivacity. "This huge lump of rock, in consequence of some singular concussion or process, one of those magnetic phenomena which have so often shaken the terrestrial crust, has in some unexpected way closed up the passage. Many and many years have passed away since the return of Saknussemm and the fall of this huge block of granite. It is not quite evident that this gallery was formerly the outlet for pent-up lava in the interior of the earth, and that these eruptive matters then circulated freely? Look at these recent fissures in the granite roof. It is evidently formed of pieces of enormous stone, placed here as if by hand of a giant, who had worked to make a strong and substantial arch. One day, after an unusual strong shock, the vast rock which stands in our way, and which was doubtless the key of a kind of arch, fell through to a level with the soil and has barred our further progress. We are right, then, in thinking that this is an unexpected obstacle with which Saknussemm did not meet, and if we do not upset it in some way, we are unworthy of following in the footsteps of the great discoverer, and incapable of finding our way to the center of the earth." In this wild way I addressed my uncle. The zeal of the professor, his earnest longing for success, had become part and parcel of my being. I wholly forgot the past. I utterly despised the future. Nothing existed for me upon the surface of this spheroid, in the bosom of which I was engulfed. No towns, no country, no Hamburg, no Koenigstrasse, not even my poor Gretchen, who by this time would believe me utterly lost in the interior of the earth. Well, cried my uncle, roused to enthusiasm by my word, let us go to work with pickaxes, with crowbars, with anything that comes to hand, but down with these terrible walls. It is far too tough and too big to be destroyed by a pickaxe or a crowbar, I replied. What then? As I said, it is useless to think of overcoming such a difficulty by means of ordinary tools. What then? What else but gunpowder, a subterranean mine? Let us blow up this obstacle that stands in our way. Gunpowder! Yes, all we have to do is get rid of this paltry obstacle. To work, Hans, to work! Cried the professor. The Icelander went back to the raft and soon returned with a huge crowbar with which he began to dig a hole in the rock, which was to serve as a mine. It was by no means a slight task. It was necessary for our purpose to make a cavity large enough to hold 50 pounds of fulminating gun cotton, the expansive powder of which is 4 times as great as that of ordinary gunpowder. I had now roused myself to an almost miraculous state of excitement. While Hans was at work, I actively assisted my uncle at preparing a long wick made from damp gunpowder, the mass of which we finally enclosed in a bag of linen. We are bound to go through, I cried enthusiastically. We are bound to go through, responded the professor, tapping me on the back. At midnight, our work as miners was completely finished. The charge of the fulminating cotton was thrust into the hollow, and the match, which we had made of considerable length, was ready. A spark was now sufficient to ignite this formidable engine and to blow the rock to atoms. We will now rest until tomorrow. It was absolutely necessary to resign myself to fate and to consent to wait for the explosion for 6 weary hours. Uh-oh, I'm not here.
Oh, you can't
I was
hear
about to
me.
say,
You can hear me now.
I'm not hearing nothing.
Quite
It
thrilling.
was.
I was jabbering away. Yeah. So let's see if we can get this straight here. They're stuck basically almost at the center of the earth in a cavern that has already collapsed once, and they're about to dynamite
Mm.
it. Brilliant. I don't know about this plan. Doesn't seem like a good
No,
idea
it
to
doesn't.
me. But
That's funny.
but I guess we'll find out in the next chapter the explosion and its
Yeah.
results. So